Under the blood moon's unyielding gaze, a single drop of crimson froze upon the snow like a forbidden vow. Alara's breath came in ragged gasps, the wind clawing at her threadbare cloak as if the very mountains conspired to strip her bare. She stumbled through the endless white expanse, her boots sinking into drifts that swallowed her steps whole. The rejection still burned hotter than any frostbite. Words from the pack's elder spat like venom. "You are no longer of us, Omega. Your weakness taints the bloodline." Banished at dawn, under the pretense of a merciful exile, they had driven her from the village with stones and snarls, her pleas lost to the howling gale. Now, as twilight bled into night, the world narrowed to survival's cruel edge. The snow fell in relentless sheets, veiling the jagged peaks of the Iron Fang Range in a shroud of silence broken only by distant youths that echoed like mournful spirits. Alara's fingers, numb and raw, clutched the pendant at her throat, a simple silver chain bearing a wolf's head etched in obsidian, a heirloom from her mother, now stained with a faint smear of her own blood from a gash on her palm. It was the only remnant of her life before, a symbol she could not bear to abandon, even as it mocked her solitude. The cold seeped into her bones, whispering of surrender, but she pressed on, driven by a flicker of defiance that the pack had tried to extinguish. Memories clawed at her mind, sharper than the wind's bite. She had been promised to Thorn, the Beta Enforcer, in a union meant to secure her place. But when the marking ceremony came, her scent, faint, elusive, carrying whispers of something ancient and untamed, had repelled him. "Unfit," he had growled, his eyes cold as the steel of his blade. The elders nodded, their judgment swift. An Omega whose essence did not yield fully to the pack's hierarchy was a danger, a fracture in the chain of command. They spoke of curses, of omens under the last full moon, but Ilara knew the truth. It was fear. Fear of her quiet strength, her visions that came unbidden in dreams, glimpses of paths unseen by others. The Pathfinder's gift, her mother had called it, a rare mark of the goddess's favor. But in the pack's eyes, it was aberration. She collapsed against a weathered boulder, the stone's chill pressing through her cloak like an accusation. The pendant swung free, catching the moon's pale light, the bloodstain glinting like a fresh wound. Why had the goddess forsaken her now? The air smelled of pine and iron. The metallic tang of impending storm mingling with the salt of her tears, frozen before they could fall. Ilara's body ached, not just from the cold, but from the hollow ache of betrayal. She had given everything, her loyalty, her silence, her very submission, only to be cast out like refuse. In the distance, the pack's fires flickered on the horizon, warm beacons she could no longer claim. Weaves rose again, closer this time, carrying the weight of pursuit or predator. She could not tell. Rising on trembling legs, Ilara scanned the shadowed tree line, her heart pounding a rhythm of dread and resolve. The snow muffled her footsteps as she pushed deeper into the wilds, where the boundary between packlands and the forbidden territories blurred. Legends spoke of the enemy beyond, the Alpha Kings of the Silverclaw realm, wolves whose blood ran hot with conquest, their kind locked in eternal feud with her own. Omegas like her were prizes or prey in their wars, bartered or broken. Yet here, in this frozen limbo, such tales felt distant, overshadowed by the immediate bite of hunger and exposure. A low growl pierced the wind, freezing her mid-stride. Not the pack's, deeper, more primal, laced with pain. Alara's instincts flared, her Omega senses sharpening despite the exhaustion. She crouched behind a drift, peering through the swirling flakes. There, half buried in the snow, lay a massive wolf, its fur matted with blood, sides heaving in labored breaths. Its eyes, golden and fierce even in agony, locked onto hers for a heartbeat before glazing over. Enemy or not, it was dying, its life ebbing into the white void. Compassion warred with caution in her chest, a moral tether pulling her forward. The pendant warmed against her skin, as if urging her on, a foolish notion perhaps, but in this moment of utter isolation it felt like the goddess's whisper. She approached slowly, murmuring soft words lost to the gale, her hands trembling as she assessed the wounds. Gashes from claws or blades, deep and festering, the scent of blood thick and coppery. Without thought, she drew her small knife, slicing her palm anew to mingle her essence with his. "Live," she breathed, pressing the cut to the wolf's flank, willing her strength, her hidden gift, into the flow. Blood to blood, a desperate rite born of the wild's ancient laws. The wolf shuddered, a rumble escaping its throat, neither thanks nor threat. Ilara bandaged what she could with strips from her cloak, the cold seeping deeper as night fully claimed the sky. She did not know if her act would save it or doom her, only that in giving, she reclaimed a fragment of herself lost to rejection. As the first stars pierced the clouds, she curled beside the beast, the pendant now slick with shared crimson, a bond forged in secrecy and snow. The wind howled on, carrying secrets of redemption yet unborn, while the moon watched, silent witness to a choice that would unravel fates entwined. The wolf's labored breaths mingled with the wind's relentless dirge, a symphony of survival that pulled Ilara from the fringes of sleep. Dawn's feeble light filtered through the canopy of frost-laced pines, painting the snow in hues of bruised silver and rose. She stirred beside the beast, her body stiff from the night's vigil, the pendant at her throat now a heavy talisman, its obsidian wolf's head crusted with their mingled blood, a crimson seal on an unspoken pact. The wound on her palm throbbed in rhythm with her pulse, a reminder that mercy had cost her dearly. Yet in the giving, something within her had stirred, uncoiling like roots long buried under ice. The wolf, no longer just a beast, but a presence that commanded the air around them, lifted its massive head, golden eyes clearing from the haze of death's grip. It regarded her not with the feral hunger of a predator, but with a depth that pierced her soul, as if it saw the fractures she hid beneath her cloak of resolve. Ilara's heart stuttered. Her Omega instincts whispered of kinship, of a thread woven by the goddess's loom, but she shoved the notion aside. This was no kin of hers. The silver-claw scent clung to its fur, musk and storm and ancient iron, marking it as the enemy, a wolf from the realms where her pack's blood had spilled in endless border skirmishes. To aid it was folly, a betrayal that could summon her own kind's wrath or worse, draw the Alpha King's hunters to her trail. Yet as she rose to gather brittle twigs for a fire, the wolf attempted to stand, its limbs buckling under the weight of its wounds. A low whine escaped it, raw and vulnerable, echoing the hollowness she felt in her chest. Compassion, that treacherous flame, flickered brighter. She knelt, pressing a hand to its flank where her blood had seeped in, feeling the heat of life returning, faint but insistent. "Rest," she murmured, her voice a thread of silk in the cold. "The mountains claim the weak, but not yet you, not while I breathe." The words were for herself as much as for him, a defiance against the exile that had stripped her of purpose. What was strength, if not choosing to mend what others deemed broken? The fire she kindled was small, a defiant spark against the encroaching white, its flames dancing like captive spirits under the moon's lingering gaze. She roasted what meager roots she could unearth, their earthy scent mingling with the sharp tang of pine sap, and offered a portion to the wolf. It ate slowly, eyes never leaving hers, a silent negotiation passing between them. In that gaze, Ilara glimpsed shadows, guilt etched in gold, the weight of crowns unseen. Her own memories surged, the pack's rejection, the elder's cold decree, Thorn's sneer as he renounced her. She had been cast out for her difference, her visions that revealed paths others feared to tread. Was this wolf, this enemy, marked by a similar curse? The pendant warmed against her skin, as if affirming the folly of her isolation. The peace shattered with the snap of branches, distant but unmistakable, pursuers, their howls slicing through the morning mist like blades. Not her pack. The cadence was wrong, deeper, laced with the thunder of silver-claw drums. The wolf tensed, a growl rumbling from its chest, protective and fierce. Ilara's blood ran cold. If they found him here, with her scent entwined in his wounds, she would be no mere exile but a traitor, slain without question. Panic clawed at her, but beneath it bloomed a strange resolve. They were bound now by blood and necessity, two outcasts in the wild's indifferent embrace. "Up!" she urged, slinging his massive form over her shoulders in a surge of unnatural strength, her Pathfinder gift awakening, unbidden, lending her limbs the endurance of ancient oaks. The wolf shifted slightly, bones cracking like thunder, fur receding to reveal glimpses of tanned skin and scarred muscle, but he held the beast's form, conserving what power remained. Together they plunged into a nearby crevice, a narrow ravine hidden by overhanging ice shelves, its walls glistening like the veins of the earth itself. The cold deepened here, a breathless sanctuary where the wind's voice dulled to a whisper and the snow fell in lazy veils, muffling their trail. Huddled in the gloom, Ilara's back pressed against the wolf's heaving side, sharing warmth that felt both forbidden and inevitable. His breath ghosted her neck, hot and ragged, stirring scents of blood and wild heather that spoke of distant thrones and fallen battles. The howls grew nearer, boots crunching snow, voices barking orders in the guttural tongue of conquerors. "The king's trail ends here, search the drifts," one snarled, his torchlight flickering like malevolent eyes at the ravine's edge. Ilara's heart pounded, a drum of terror and thrill. She could feel the wolf's tension, his body shielding hers instinctively, as if she were pack, not prey. In that shared peril, empathy unfurled like a fern in spring's thaw. She traced the pendant's chain, its bloodied wolf's head, a mirror to the beast beside her, both marked, both hunted. Why did the goddess bind them thus? Her mind raced with dilemmas: flee alone and survive, or stand with this enemy and risk all. The wolf's paw nudged her hand, a gesture of alliance, rough yet tender. And in that touch, curiosity bloomed into something deeper. A bond forged not in romance's honeyed illusions, but in the raw poetry of mutual salvation. He was no mere animal. She sensed the kingly sorrow in him, the ethical core that had led him to this wounded flight, guilt shadowing his every breath like a crown of thorns. The hunters passed, their lights fading into the storm, leaving only the echo of hooves and the scent of scorched earth from a discarded torch. Ilara exhaled, trembling, her fingers lingering on his fur. The refuge held, for now, but the world beyond pressed in. Wars of blood and betrayal, destinies that demanded choices sharper than any claw. In the wolf's golden gaze, she saw her reflection. Not the rejected Omega, but a woman reborn in the fire of unlikely mercy. The pendant pulsed with their shared life, a symbol of wounds that might yet heal under the moon's watchful eye. And now I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The ravine's shadows clung like forgotten oaths, a cradle of ice and stone where the world above raged on without mercy. Ilara's breath fogged the air, mingling with the wolf's warmer exhalations, their bodies pressed close in the narrow cleft, a fragile alliance against the encroaching chill. Hours had bled into one another since the hunter's retreat, the storm's fury now a muffled roar, as if the mountains themselves conspired to seal them in this hidden womb. Her palm still ached from the self-inflicted cut, the skin knitting unevenly around the edges, but the pendant at her throat thrummed with a subtle heat, its obsidian wolf's head a dark mirror to the beast beside her. Blood bound them, a crimson thread woven in desperation, and in its wake, questions stirred like embers in ash. She shifted slightly, her cloak damp from melted snow, the scent of wet fur and iron-rich blood saturating the space between them. The wolf's golden eyes, half-lidded in exhaustion, tracked her every movement, not with suspicion now, but a quiet vigilance that spoke of burdens heavier than his wounds. Ilara's mind wandered to the pack's fires she had glimpsed from afar, their warmth a taunt, a reminder of the life stripped from her. Rejection had hollowed her, leaving echoes of shame that whispered she deserved this isolation. Yet here, in the wolf's presence, that hollowness began to fill with something unnameable, curiosity laced with fear, a pull that defied the ancient feuds etched into her blood. He was Silverclaw, enemy incarnate, his kind the architects of raids that had orphaned children in her village, spilled rivers of red across the borders. To harbor him was to court death. Yet the goddess's symbols, the moon's pale arc visible through a crack in the ice, the pendant's insistent warmth, seemed to mock her caution. Hunger gnawed at her core, sharper than the cold, but she rationed the last of the roots, breaking them into small pieces and offering them to him. His massive jaw worked slowly, teeth glinting in the dim light, and for a moment, their gazes locked, a bridge across the chasm of species and war. In those depths, Ilara glimpsed fractures, not the savage conqueror of legends, but a soul etched with regret, eyes shadowed by choices that had cost more than flesh. What guilt did an Alpha King carry to flee into exile like this? Her own visions flickered at the edges of her mind, unbidden glimpses of forked paths, bloodied thrones, betrayed oaths, a crown forged in fire and loss. The Pathfinder's gift, long suppressed in fear of the pack's scorn, now tugged at her, urging revelation. She pushed it down, focusing instead on the practical, tearing strips from her cloak to rebind his gashes, her fingers brushing fur that was surprisingly soft beneath the matting. A distant rumble shook the ravine, thunder or the echo of hooves on frozen ground. Ilara froze, her heart slamming against her ribs like a caged bird. The wolf tensed, a low growl vibrating through his chest into hers, protective instinct flaring without words. They were not safe. The hunters would return, scouring every crevice for their fallen leader. She could abandon him now, slip away under cover of the storm's remnants, reclaim her solitary path toward whatever scraps of freedom the wilds offered. The thought twisted in her gut, a moral snare. What was freedom, if built on the bones of mercy withheld? The pendant swung free as she leaned forward, catching a sliver of moonlight that turned the bloodstain to liquid ruby, a vow she could not break. Instead, she rose, peering through the ice-laced opening. The world beyond was a white labyrinth, drifts sculpted by wind into treacherous waves, but a faint trail led upward to a cluster of boulders, potential cover if they could reach it. "We move," she whispered, more to steel herself than to him. The wolf struggled to his paws, limbs trembling but unyielding, his form shimmering at the edges as if the beast fought to yield to the man within. With a surge of her hidden strength, Ilara supported his weight, her shoulder bearing the brunt as they navigated the ravine slope. Snow cascaded around them, silent avalanches that buried their tracks, the air thick with the scent of pine resin and impending dusk. Each step was a negotiation with pain, hers from the strain, his from wounds that wept fresh crimson into the white. They crested the rise just as shadows lengthened, the boulders forming a natural alcove shielded by overhanging rock, its floor dusted with needles from ancient evergreens. Ilara kindled another fire, small and fierce, the flame's golden tongues licking at the cold like defiant prayers. The wolf collapsed beside it, his breathing ragged, but his eyes held hers with a gratitude that pierced deeper than any blade. In the firelight, she saw him more clearly, scars crisscrossing his hide, not mere battle marks, but deliberate patterns, runes of Silverclaw royalty, faded by time and torment. Her fingers hovered near one, tracing air above the raised flesh, feeling the echo of old agonies. "Who hunts you so relentlessly?" she murmured, the question slipping free like a confession. No answer came, only a soft nudge of his muzzle against her hand, warm and trusting, stirring a warmth in her chest that bloomed against the frost. As night deepened, the bond solidified in shared silence. Ilara spoke of her exile in fragments, the pack's betrayal, the marking's cruel rejection, her visions dismissed as madness. The wolf listened, his presence a balm, empathy weaving through the barriers of enmity. She felt it then, the shift, fear yielding to understanding, curiosity to a tentative kinship. He was no monster, but a king broken by duty's weight, his melancholy a mirror to her own. The pendant rested between them, its bloodied surface reflecting the fire's glow, symbol of wounds that bound rather than divided. Outside, Ueves rose again, closer, a chorus of pursuit that promised confrontation. Ilara's resolve hardened. They would face it together, two souls adrift in the storm's embrace, where redemption whispered on the wind like a half-remembered song. Yet doubt lingered in the quiet hours, a spiritual thorn. Could an Omega heal what an Alpha King's guilt had wrought? The moon climbed higher, bathing the alcove in silver, and Ilara wondered if this refuge was but a prelude to greater trials, where love's proof would demand more than blood, perhaps the surrender of all she held dear. The fire crackled on, a heartbeat in the night, as destinies intertwined beneath the indifferent stars. The alcove's fire had dwindled to embers, glowing like the last defiant breaths of a dying star, casting elongated shadows that danced across the scarred boulders like specters of unspoken regrets. Ilara sat with her knees drawn to her chest, the wolf's massive form curled protectively at her side, his warmth a bulwark against the night's insidious creep. The pendant hung heavy between her breasts, its obsidian wolf's head now a congealed emblem of their shared peril, the bloodstain flaking like rust from an ancient blade. Hours had slipped away in vigilant quiet, the distant Ueves fading into the wind's mournful sigh, leaving only the rhythmic crackle of flames and the subtle rise and fall of his breathing. Yet sleep eluded her, chased by the undercurrent of her visions, fleeting images that clawed at the edges of her mind, sharper now, insistent, as if the goddess herself stirred the veil. She traced the pendant's chain with numb fingers, the metal cool yet pulsing faintly, syncing with her heartbeat. What was this pull, this invisible tether that bound her to an enemy whose golden eyes held the weight of fallen kingdoms? The air in the alcove carried the mingled scents of charred pine, blood's metallic tang, and the wolf's wild essence, earth and storm, laced with something regal, like aged leather and forged steel. Ilara's exile had taught her the solitude of rejection, the way it hollowed the soul until only echoes remained. But here, in this improbable sanctuary, a new ache bloomed. Not loneliness, but the terror of connection, of vulnerability to one who could shatter her anew. Her pack had deemed her weak for her dreams, for the paths she glimpsed in the moon's silver light, forked trails of fate that others ignored, fearing their unyielding truth. The Pathfinder's gift, her mother had whispered on her deathbed, a divine compass for the lost. But to Ilara, it had always felt like a curse, amplifying her otherness until the elder's banishment seemed inevitable. A shiver ran through the wolf, deeper than the cold's grasp, his body convulsing as if gripped by an inner tempest. Ilara's hand flew to his flank, feeling the feverish heat beneath the fur, the wounds she had bound now seeping anew, dark rivulets staining the snow-dusted ground. Panic surged in her chest, hot and visceral, her breath catching like thorns in her throat. "No," she whispered, pressing her palm to the gash, willing her essence to flow once more. But this time, as her blood mingled with his, the world tilted. Visions erupted unbidden, not fragments, but a torrent, a grand hall of ice-hewn thrones under a blood moon, a betrayal etched in silver blades, a king's roar of anguish as allies turned to foes. She saw him, not the wolf, but the man, crowned in guilt, his hands stained with the blood of kin, exiled by his own code of honor for a war crime he could not forgive in himself. The Silverclaw realm fractured, rivals circling like vultures, and at the heart of it all, a prophecy whispered in lunar temples, redemption through the blood of an unlikely healer, an Omega whose sight pierced the veil of destiny. Ilara gasped, pulling back as if scorched, her eyes wide in the emberlight. The wolf's form shimmered, fur rippling like water disturbed by stone, bones reshaping with audible cracks that echoed her fracturing resolve. He rose on human limbs, towering and broad-shouldered, his skin etched with the same rune scars that had marked his beastly hide. Faded glyphs of royalty, glowing faintly under the moon's indirect gaze, filtering through the alcove's overhang. Naked save for the shadows that clung to him like a mantle, he met her stare with those golden eyes, now framed by a face chiseled from hardship. High cheekbones shadowed by stubble, lips pressed into a line of restrained pain, and hair dark as midnight falling in disheveled waves. "You," he rasped, voice gravel rough from disuse, carrying the timbre of command tempered by sorrow. "Your blood. It calls the change, and shows me truths I fled." She scrambled back, heart thundering a war drum in her ears, the pendant swinging like a pendulum of accusation. This was no mere wanderer. The air around him hummed with alpha authority, the scent of kingship overwhelming the confined space. Power and melancholy intertwined, a storm held in check by ethical chains. "Who are you?" she demanded, though the vision's echoes supplied the answer, her voice trembling not from fear alone, but from the revelation's weight. The man, the Alpha King, knelt slowly, wincing as fresh blood trickled from his side, mirroring the pendant's stain. "Kyle," he said, the name a low rumble, "High Alpha of Silverclaw, or what remains of it." His gaze dropped to the pendant, recognition flickering like lightning in his eyes. That mark, the obsidian wolf. It's the sign of the Pathfinder, the seer who guides the lost thrones. My forebears spoke of one born to rival packs, whose blood would bind or break the endless war. Alara's mind reeled, the cold seeping deeper as denial warred with the undeniable. Her gift had always been a private torment, visions dismissed as Omega frailty, but here it manifested raw and revelatory, exposing not just his past, but their intertwined fates. She saw it now, the key he perceived in her. Her sight could chart the path to reclaim his realm, exposing the traitor's hand in the coup that had driven him into the wilds, a rival beta who poisoned the council with whispers of weakness. Yet to embrace this was to step into the maelstrom, to heal not just his body, but the guilt that corroded his soul, demanding she risk her fragile freedom for a destiny that might consume them both. "I saved a wolf," she murmured, fingers clutching the pendant as if it could anchor her. "Not a king, not your war." But even as she spoke, the warmth spread from the talisman, syncing with his pulse, a spiritual affirmation that rejection had forged her for this, to be the light in his shadowed crown. Kyle reached out, his hand hovering near hers, calloused fingers scarred from battles she now glimpsed in flashes, merciful stays of execution, choices that cost him allies, marking him as the ethical monarch who valued life over conquest. "You are the key," he said softly, voice laced with awe and dread, "the one the lunar prophecies foretold. My flight was no accident, the goddess led me to your mercy, but to claim it, to let you guide me back. It would bind us in blood and fire." His touch finally brushed her skin, electric and tender, igniting a spark that transcended enmity, a bond of souls, resistant yet inevitable. Alara felt the pull, the moral precipice, Accept her role as redeemer, weaving her visions into his redemption, or sever the thread and wander alone, her gift forever a solitary curse. Outside, the wind howled anew, carrying the faint clamor of approaching foes, hunters or her own pack, the lines blurring in the night. The embers flared briefly, illuminating the pendant's bloodied gleam, a symbol of revelations that demanded choice. What was destiny, if not the courage to embrace the wounds it revealed? Alara's heart ached with the weight of it, a spiritual crossroads under the moon's unblinking eye, where healing an enemy's guilt might forge her own rebirth or shatter them eternally. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. The alcove's embers had long since surrendered to ash, leaving the air thick with the acrid bite of spent fire and the metallic undercurrent of blood, both old and threatening new. Alara's pulse thrummed in her ears like the distant war drums of encroaching doom, her body coiled beside Kale's transformed form, the pendant at her throat, a leaden anchor pulling her toward the abyss of Revelation's aftermath. Moonlight slanted through the overhang in silver shafts, illuminating the rune scars on his bare chest, ancient sigils that pulsed faintly as if echoing the spiritual storm raging within her. He had named her the Key, the pathfinder whose visions could unravel the traitor's web and restore his fractured realm. But the weight of that truth pressed like the mountain's unyielding stone, forcing her to confront not just his past, but the ghosts of her own. Kyle's golden eyes, shadowed by the sorrow of a king unmade, held hers in the dimness, his breath steadying as the fever broke under her blood's lingering magic. "The coup came at the blood moon's zenith," he murmured, voice a gravelly confession laced with the chill of self-reproach. My beta Riven, once brother in arms, whispered poison into the council's ears. He painted me weak for sparing lives in the border wars, for choosing mercy over slaughter when your pack raided our flanks. I exiled him for lesser treacheries. But he returned with allies from the shadowed clans, blades drawn in the throne hall. Blood soaked the ice floors that night. I fled not as coward, but to spare more death, carrying the guilt of every fallen loyalist on my shoulders. His fingers clenched against the snow-dusted ground, knuckles whitening, the ethical core that defined him now, a chain binding him to exile's frost. Alara's chest tightened, the pendant warming against her skin as if feeding on the raw emotion spilling between them. Her visions had shown fragments, the glint of silver daggers under torchlight, Riven's sneer as he claimed the crown, the Silverclaw pack tearing itself asunder in civil strife. But now, hearing it voiced, the horror bloomed visceral. This man, this enemy Alpha, had spared her kind in battles that could have ended her village. His melancholy born not of conquest's thrill, but the torment of lives he could not save. Yet it clashed with her own scars, the raids that had claimed her father's life, Silverclaw howls echoing through the night as flames devoured homes. To forgive that legacy, to weave her gift into his redemption, meant betraying the blood that coursed through her veins, the pack's rejection be damned. Freedom whispered temptation, slip away at dawn, let the wars consume him, reclaim her solitary path through the wilds. But love's shadow loomed, resistant and rationalized, a bond forged in shared crimson that demanded more, proof through sacrifice, not easy alliance. The night's fragile peace shattered with a guttural howl that sliced the wind like a claw through flesh, closer than before, multiplied into a chorus that vibrated the boulders around them. Kale surged to his feet, naked form taut with predatory grace, scars gleaming like frost-kissed steel in the moonlight. Riven's hunters, he growled, the alpha timbre rumbling through the alcove, stirring Alara's omega instincts to a fevered pitch, submission warring with defiance. She rose beside him, cloak clutched tight, the pendant swinging free to catch the lunar glow, its bloodied obsidian wolf a beacon of their improbable union. Outside, shadows materialized from the swirling snow, a pack of silver-claw wolves, their fur silvered by the moon, eyes burning with feral loyalty to the usurper. At their forefront loped a massive beast, larger than the rest, its pelt scarred with the same runes as Kale's, riven, twisted by ambition into a rival alpha whose betrayal reeked of sulfur and deceit. Alara's heart hammered, visions flashing unbidden, the throne hall's carnage replayed, Riven's jaws closing on a loyalist's throat, the prophecy's whisper of a pathfinder's blood tipping the scales toward unity or annihilation. Kale stepped forward, shielding her with his body, his voice a thunderous command that echoed off the ice. "Stand down, Riven. The goddess binds what you seek to sever. This war ends not in more graves, but in truth unveiled." The traitor shifted, bones cracking as he assumed human form, a hulking figure with eyes like chipped obsidian, lips curled in mocking triumph. "Truth? You fled like a whelp, Kale, leaving the realm to rot under your merciful delusions. The packs demand strength, not this. Omega filth from enemy lands." His gaze raked over Alara, disdain twisting his features, igniting a spark of fury in her core. She was no prize, no weakness. Her exile had forged her into something sharper, her gift a blade hidden in silk. The confrontation erupted in a blur of motion. Riven lunged, claws extended, but Kyle met him midair, their forms colliding with the force of tempests, snow exploding in crystalline veils that stung like needles. Ilara pressed against the boulder, the cold biting her skin, but her mind raced with moral lightning. Intervene with her visions, expose Riven's deeper treachery, a secret pact with her own pack's elders, trading border secrets for power, or hold back, letting alphas settle it in blood, preserving her liberty from this entangling fate. The pendant burned hot now, a spiritual prod, as Kale grappled with his rival, fists and fangs drawing fresh crimson that painted the snow in abstract strokes of war. Riven's snarls carried venomous barbs. "She taints you, brother. Her blood weakens the crown." But Kale's retort was a roar of ethical fire. "Weakness is the blade that spares the innocent. Yield and face judgment, not death." Ilara's choice crystallized in the chaos, her pathfinder sight piercing the fray. She saw the path of forgiveness, a vision of packs united under a redeemed king, her hand guiding the way, love as the forge that tempered his guilt into compassionate rule. Or the fork of freedom, Riven victorious, her fleeing into obscurity, the war's cycle unbroken, her heart forever scarred by withheld mercy. The wind howled in sympathy, carrying Uives from afar, her own pack closing in, drawn by the scent of blood and destiny's unraveling. With a cry that tore from her depths, Ilara stepped forward, palm slicing open on a jagged rock, blood welling to mingle with the snow at their feet. "Enough!" Her voice, amplified by the gift's awakening, wove through the melee like lunar threads, forcing both alphas to still. Visions poured from her lips, Riven's clandestine meetings with Thorn, her former betrothed, plotting to exploit the border chaos for mutual gain, selling souls for thrones. Riven recoiled, exposed, his form wavering as the pack's howls turned accusatory. Kale's gaze met hers, golden depths brimming with awe and the raw edge of potential love, a redemption not gifted lightly, but earned through her choice to bind her freedom to his war. Yet doubt lingered, a ethical precipice. Forgiveness might crown them in unity, but at what cost to her soul, scarred by rejection's thorns? The moon hung heavy, bloodied by clouds, as the packs converged, the pendant dripping with fresh essence, symbol of a judgment that teetered between war's abyss and compassion's fragile dawn. In that visceral standoff, Ilara felt the weight of rebirth's demand. What was true strength, if not risking all for the mercy that healed both enemy and self? The air thickened with the scent of impending rain and iron, destinies poised on her next breath, under the indifferent gaze of stars that had witnessed empires rise and fall. The snow-laden air hung heavy with the copper tang of blood and the electric charge of unraveling fates, the moon's bloodied veil casting a crimson pall over the converging packs, like a shroud woven from divine judgment. Alara stood at the epicenter of the storm, her palm throbbing where the jagged rock had bitten deep, fresh crimson pooling in the snow at her feet, a sacrificial offering that mirrored the pendant's eternal stain, its obsidian wolf's head now slick and gleaming under the lunar gaze. The visions had spilled from her like a river breaking its banks, exposing Riven's treachery in vivid strokes. Shadowed pacts with Thorn, her exiled betrothed, their whispers trading pack secrets for thrones built on mutual ruin. The rival Alpha recoiled, his human form trembling as the Silverclaw wolves circled him with snarls of betrayal, their silver fur rippling like agitated waves. From the tree line, her own pack emerged, familiar faces twisted in confusion and rage, elders' eyes narrowing at the sight of her, the rejected Omega who dared wield the goddess's sight. Kale's chest heaved beside her, his scarred body a testament to battles endured and mercies granted, golden eyes locked on hers with a depth that transcended the fray, a silent plea woven with the melancholy of a king who had long carried guilt as his crown. The wind whipped through the alcove's mouth, carrying ewives that blended into a cacophony of accusation and despair, the cold seeping into Alara's bones like the chill of choices irrevocable. Her heart pounded a frantic rhythm, each beat echoing the moral precipice she teetered upon, to bind her freedom to his redemption, forging unity from enmity's ashes, or to sever the thread, reclaiming solitude at the cost of endless war. The pendant burned against her skin, a spiritual compass pulsing with the weight of destiny, urging her toward sacrifice, not as defeat, but as the ultimate proof of love's redemptive fire. What was rebirth, if not surrendering the self to heal the fractures of another? Riven lunged once more, desperation twisting his features into a mask of feral hunger, claws raking the air toward Alara as if to silence the prophet who unraveled his empire of lies. "Lies from a tainted Omega!" he bellowed, voice cracking like ice under pressure. But Kyle intercepted, their bodies colliding in a visceral clash that sent snow spiraling into the night. Fists met flesh with the dull thud of unresolved sins, blood spraying in fine mists that caught the moonlight like rubies scattered by the gods. Ilara's pack hesitated at the edge, Thorn's sneer visible among them, his betrayal laid bare in her visions, a dagger of personal wound that pierced deeper than any claw. She could flee into their midst, claim the exile's pardon by denouncing the Silverclaw king, preserving her liberty in the hollow comfort of familiarity. But the pendant's warmth spread through her veins, mingling with Kale's essence, a bond that whispered of greater purpose, her Pathfinder gift not a curse of isolation, but the key to mending the rifts her rejection had mirrored. With a cry born of faith's defiant spark, Alara thrust forward, her bloodied hand extended like a banner of truce. "See the truth!" she commanded, the words amplified by the goddess's favor, visions cascading outward in ethereal waves that enveloped the packs. Images flickered in the air, lunar holograms etched in silver light. Riven's clandestine oaths under torchlit caves, Thorn's greedy nods as borders were bartered, the endless cycle of raids fueled by their ambition. Gasps rippled through the wolves, forms shifting uneasily as loyalties fractured like brittle ice. Her own elders recoiled, shame etching their faces, while Kyle's loyalists surged forward, encircling Riven with growls that promised judgment without slaughter. The traitor fell to his knees, defeated not by force alone, but by the moral clarity of exposure, his empire crumbling under the weight of compassion's unyielding gaze. Kyle rose from the fray, bloodied but unbroken, his hand finding Alara's in a touch that grounded her amid the chaos. Rough calluses against her palm, a union of wounds that sparked something profound. A love resisted no longer but accepted as destiny's forge. "You chose us," he murmured, voice thick with awe and the raw edge of healing guilt, his golden eyes reflecting the moon's redemption. Not for power, but for the mercy that crowns the fallen. Ilara's breath hitched, tears freezing on her lashes as the Pax knelt in uneasy accord, the wind falling silent as if the mountains themselves bore witness. She had sacrificed her solitude, her freedom's illusion, to weave her gift into his rebirth, a king's guilt transmuted into ethical rule, her rejection alchemized into the strength of a queen unbound by hierarchies. In that moment of union, the pendant cooled, its bloodstain fading like a scar, honored rather than hidden, symbol of a renascimento where love proved not reward, but the arduous path from despair to dawn. The Pax dispersed into the night, Riven bound for trial under Kale's merciful code, Thorn's treachery exposed to her elder's reckoning. Ilara leaned into Kale's embrace, the warmth of his body chasing the frost from her soul, their scents entwining, wild heather and ancient pine, blood and renewal. Under the clearing moon, they walked from the alcove hand in hand, the snow yielding to their steps like a world remade. Faith had triumphed over despair, destiny embraced over liberty's lonely call, and in the quiet poetry of their shared breath, Ilara felt whole, not as Omega or outcast, but as the healer of wounds that spanned realms. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent yet approving, as the first hints of dawn gilded the peaks. What was strength, if not the choice to bind fates in the fire of compassion, turning enemies into eternal allies? Their path stretched into the unknown, a tapestry of redemption woven from blood and moonlight, where every scar became a story of grace. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe. Because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.